Hi, I'm Liselle and welcome back to my channel where I talk about all things writing, traditional publishing, and a little bit of reading. And today I'm going to talk to you about the things in traditional publishing that don't matter. And I mean, of course, this is an opinion. Everything on the internet is an opinion, and there are always special snowflakes out in the world and like unicorns and exceptions to things. But I got my book deal with the Big Five publisher with Simon & Schuster in 2019. I've since published 5 books, 4 of those with Simon & Schuster, 1 with Abrams, who is also a pretty big publisher, and I have 3 more on the way. And so I feel like I've kind of been in the industry long enough to kind of like hear from people and have my own experiences and like form my own opinions about things that I don't really think matter in traditional publishing. And by that I mean by and large. Of course, everything matters a little bit and could do something a little bit, and everything is a touch point for a book sale and things like that. But essentially what I want to talk about are things that I just think are not kind of worth stressing about or being overly concerned about when it comes to kind of your book and how things are being perceived. And after the fact, because I want to be helpful in these videos, of course this is a little clickbaity, is a little, you know, fun time, but I do actually want to be helpful. And so after the fact, I am going to talk about some of the things that I think do matter in traditional publishing. And hopefully this is generally of interest to people, but I hope that it also, like if you're thinking of pursuing traditional publishing or you're debuting or you're in trad pub, what have you, that these are kind of things that can help you weigh what kind of deserves your energy and what is probably sort of wasted energy. And so I hope that's what this video will do. And so let's go ahead and get started. Starting off with deadlines. I feel like deadlines in trad pub can have this like very much sort of a mystique to them and like a fear, because I feel like authors are constantly posting, oh my gosh, I'm on deadline, I'm dying, everything is terrible. And the idea of having a deadline, it feels like this is like the end point. Like you must achieve this by this deadline or else. And that's just not how traditional publishing deadlines actually function. So really the deadline is something that is being planned out. And it's a little bit loose in that if you need longer, you can talk to your editor and you can be like, actually, I think this is going to take me a little bit longer than that. Can I have more time? If you are writing and you are struggling and you cannot make the deadline, you can ask for more time as well. These are all things that you are allowed to do. You are allowed to ask for more time. You are allowed to shift deadlines. And sometimes the publisher will be the ones that are shifting deadlines on you. They might shift deadlines because they're shifting the publication date. Maybe they decided it was better for you to come out in a different season, have your book come out in a different season. And so they choose that. And so then your deadlines shift. They're like, you can have more time for this. Or maybe they have some sort of strategy. Their strategy is they want to crash the book. And so they're like, crashing the book means like you do everything on an accelerated schedule. And so they might be like, can you make these specific, like really tight deadlines? And there are certain things in traditional publishing that have different sort of deadline requirements, if you will. So if you're doing like an IP project, which is like an intellectual property project, for example, I wrote a book for Abrams/Mattel, and it was like a He-Man book. And so usually when you're doing those sorts of books, you're writing based on someone else's intellectual property. Those deadlines tend to be tighter. You tend to need to be a little bit of a faster writer. But in general, deadlines are flexible. And so if you need more time, just ask for more time. And that's why I say kind of don't matter, because that seemingly hard deadline is not as inflexible as it may seem. But where you can get into difficulty with deadlines is if you are pushing your deadline so much that it is affecting your publication date, because then you are pushing out your publication date. And so depending on how much that date is being pushed, that can then affect a lot of things. It can affect the strategy around your book. It can affect how they organize sales and salespeople. It can also affect, to be honest, how the in-house team feels about you, and whether you become sort of frustrating to work with at a certain point. But I feel like the stretch for that point is like a lot wider than people might expect. It is very common, exceedingly common, for authors to push deadline or need enough extensions that their season that they were supposed to come out in can be pushed. It's just something that happens more frequently than you might think. And so if you need more time, if you need that deadline extension, this is something to be really upfront with about your publisher, your editor. And I think it's always good to kind of err on the side of caution. If you think a deadline is too tight, just ask for more time. Just ask for more time, because the sooner you ask for it, the more that your publisher, editor, team, everyone can prepare for that longer amount of time, versus if you are like, yeah, let me stick to this like super tight deadline because that's the deadline and I have to do it by that time. And then you're waiting until you're like right up against the deadline to be like, oh no, I need more time. You know, if you do it more in advance, then you can have people work around that and things like that. But these deadlines are not as hard and fast as you would think. And I mean, even in the cases in which deadlines have been pushed years, these books do still come out. And so they're not as like a big a deal as I think they might seem. Blurbs. This is also something that doesn't matter. So in my opinion, blurbs, which are those little endorsements you see on the front of book covers or the back of book covers, inside book jackets, that sort of thing. These are things that I think are very important to authors. I think authors are very emotionally invested in blurbs because you as an author are asking other authors who you admire, whose work you have presumably read, consumed, or really enjoyed, and you're asking them to read your book and provide an endorsement. And it is nerve-wracking, and it's something that a lot of authors it's important to them because, you know, think if you are an author, you're someone that loves reading and writing and books, and this person that you admire is agreeing to read your book. Not only they read it, they liked it, they gave you a little a little bit of praise. And that feels really good. And that can really bolster your confidence. It can make you feel better about your book. But there are also lots of books that come out with blurbs that do perfectly fine. It is not something that you need. And in fact, I often see readers saying that they don't really care about blurbs, but I do think there is something that triggers a little bit in the brain, depending on whose name they see. But sometimes it's not necessarily the same because an author's taste in books can be very different from the sort of books that they write. So I also think it's a bit of a fallacy to think just because X author blurbed a book that it's going to be reminiscent of their own work or their own books. I don't think that's necessarily true. I think blurbs and like early blurbs can sometimes, you know, putting a lot of those out can trigger in people's mind that this is kind of like a buzzy book and people are talking about it and that sort of thing. But at the end of the day, your book can come out with no blurbs and it can still do perfectly well. I don't think people notice the absence of blurbs on books. I think some people might even like it because then the cover is sort of pristine and absent of, you know, any additional things on the cover, and there's already so many things that get put on covers. I think what I would say matters more is the sort of promotional aspect from those other authors and those kind of feeling like there is a natural word of mouth. So it's one thing for an author to give the blurb, but if they really loved the book and they are going on their own social platforms, whatever, panels, however they are, and they're talking about how much they loved it and they're hyping it up, up to other people, to be honest, I feel like that has a heavier impact than their words on the page. I also think because some people feel skeptical about blurbs, I think they think a lot of authors are just like giving blurbs to friends willy-nilly. And so I think there's also a little bit of like mistrust in there as well. But I just think like on the whole, for the most part, blurbs do not matter as much as you think they matter. And so I also say this because I feel like authors get really disappointed and really sad when they put out a book and they didn't get blurbs for it, they didn't have blurbs for it, what have you. I've seen books with no blurbs be in like book boxes and things like that and get plenty of attention. Gonna talk about book boxes later. Get plenty of attention. They are not a necessary thing. They are just something that is helpful. And that's kind of it. Like, they can be helpful, but they're not the end all be all. Book tours. This one will maybe make people a little bit sad, but book tours don't matter. They do not matter really as much as people might think they do. And I say this as an author who was sent on tour by my publisher. And I just think when you are this sort of average mid-list author, I do not think you are pulling the numbers at events for a tour to be financially worth it. I think it's great, like for me as an author, like getting to go travel on my publisher's dime and getting to connect with readers and connect with indie bookstores and go to different places. That was amazing. Of course that mattered. Those were really fantastic memories and experiences for me. But did they sell books? Sure. Did they sell enough books to offset the cost? I highly doubt it. I highly doubt it, especially considering the fact that I myself as the author am only making a percentage of those sales. It's not like I'm getting the entirety of that. And so do I think that would be worth it? Would have been worth it to do a tour on my own dime? Certainly not. Definitely not. I think when you are a large author and you have a lot of pull, that's when tours become worth it, because you know that you are going to fill up a venue, you're going to fill up a space. All those people are going to buy books. They're going to come, they're going to be enthusiastic, and that's really different. But I think for a lot of authors, you are just not really getting that sort of turnout. I think the highest turnout I got on tour was maybe 15 people, generously, if I'm being very generous, like 15 people. And that is just not a lot. It's not a big turnout to be worth it. And you see a lot of people posting on social media being like, nobody came to my event, or only these many people came to my event. And that's just the thing about events in general. And I will kind of like, maybe I'll meld tour and launch events together. These are things that, like, as an author, if they make you happy and they are a thing that you want to do and you want to celebrate and you want to be a part of that, 100% do those things. 100%. I just would caution putting in and investing a lot of money into doing those sorts of things, because I just have not seen the ROI on it, the return on investment for it, when you are not like a huge author with a ton of pull, because that's the difference. However, what I do think works, and what I do actually really wish that publishers would do more, is to send groups of authors on tour together, because I think that is really different, especially if you are pairing them up with an author who does have that sort of pull, because then what you are getting is the author that has the pull to bring in the numbers is helping support those other authors that may not necessarily have those numbers. And you also can hit a lot of different levels. You can hit with different genres, you can hit with different demographics, and you can just get a lot more bang for your buck when people go into an event and they have a choice of 4 books, 4 authors. They're able to watch panel discussions. I find just are a lot more engaging than watching one author speak, or one author with maybe like one partner. And so it's just, it has a bigger impact. And so I think those are really worth it. And yeah, I really do wish that more publishers would do that and send them on tour together, instead of doing these sort of separate one-off things. I know that some authors on their own can sell out a whole event, but it just seems like a good opportunity to help bolster the sales and the effectiveness of marketing for some of your authors that are smaller, that don't have that sort of pull. But that is to say, to wrap up the events and the events and tour thing, that yeah, I don't think they matter. I've had launch events, which have been great. I've had at least in this past sort of year, I had an experience where I launched a book and I didn't bother doing a launch event, and there was no difference in sales. It did not make a difference whether I did a launch event or whether I didn't do a launch event. It's really a thing for kind of you and your community and community building and connection with indie bookstores, that sort of thing. But it's not something that made a difference sort of on the sales room cutting floor. So if you don't get to be sent on a tour, which most authors don't, I wouldn't despair if you are feeling overwhelmed and you don't want to set up a bunch of book events. That's also fine. I just don't think these, at the end of the day, matter as much as one might think. Your debut doesn't matter. And I think the more that I am in this industry and the longer that I'm here, the more that statement feels true. There is a reason why people say phrases like your backlist sells your front list. This means really, and what I'm saying is that how your debut novel performs, how that comes out, doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things. There are ways it matters, of course. Every single one of these things I talk about, there are ways that they matter. But people put a lot of pressure on their debut. They put a lot of pressure on it to do really well, and to do all of these big things, to really like fulfill all of their author dreams in one shot. And if you take a moment to think about that objectively, that is wild. It is wild to assume or to put pressure on the very first book you publish to be your career maker. That is a lot. There are tons of authors out in the world who do not get sort of significant pickup on their books until several books down the line. And something that I have observed personally, seeing debut authors and being in the industry and watching them, is I will see so many debut authors burn out on their debut because they are throwing absolutely everything. They're burning themselves out, working to market and promote, and they say yes to absolutely everything. You want to do this interview, you want to do this podcast, you want to do this guest post. They say yes to everything. And they exhaust themselves trying to do that while also trying to write often the next book in the contract, because contracts are often for 2 books, and they are trying to do all that at the exact same time. And they exhaust themselves, and then they get the results, the immediate first week results of all of that effort, and it is not a career maker, and they fall apart. It is hard, it is crushing, and it just makes it so that everything going forward becomes much more difficult. And I have seen authors who have put out that debut and then just kind of like disappeared. And there might be many reasons for those things, but I've also heard personally from some of those people that they were like, yeah, I burned out. I did everything, I did too much, and I was just tired. I was too tired to keep doing anything else. And so why I say your debut doesn't matter is rather to say that your debut is not your entire career. Your debut is a start. That's why it's called a debut. It is the start of your career. And things can go in so many different ways from there. And I mean, I say that the opposite too, because sometimes people have a lot of success with their debut book and it really gets to them. The ego gets involved. And then when things don't go the same way for the subsequent books, that is also really crushing. And so I think in any way kind of pinning your whole career on your debut is just too much pressure to put on it. I personally feel that it's better for authors to have emphasis on your long-running career, because that can go in any which way direction. And I just believe that that is a better focus. And regardless of how your debut book does, there is still somewhere else to go. And I mean, there are real impacts, of course, of how your debut goes and how it performs. Publishers, now you have sales data. Publishers are going to look at your sales data. They may decide that they don't want to buy further books from you because your sales weren't that good, or they didn't think they were that good, or it didn't perform the way they wanted, etc., etc. And of course, if your debut does really well, then you can have the opposite effect. They can be like, yeah, let's get more books from you. Let's pay you lots more money. You get more opportunities, etc., etc., etc. And so, of course, there are effects that happen based on how your debut is received. But this is to say that don't matter is your debut is not your entire career. And that's really the takeaway. You can have a debut flop and you can do better later. You can have a debut just do sort of middle of the line, and you can build up to doing better with every single book. And so it is to say that you and your career as an author is not just that. And that's why I say that debuts don't matter. And on that note, your first week sales don't matter. This is something that I'm sure if you follow me on this channel, you've heard me talk about in many different situations. But publishers put a lot of emphasis on first week sales. And they put a lot of emphasis on first week sales because your first week sales are often the thing that is going to get you on, for example, a bestseller list, things like that. So if you want to get on a bestseller list, those first week sales being high are really important. They're also important because that's sort of how the publisher buys in. When you have big first week sales, the publisher is really excited. They're like, you did it. You are the best. You're a success, full steam ahead. And so in that way, they put a lot of pressure on first week sales. You as an author, first week sales don't matter because they are not the lifetime of the book. They are not. And most of us are not going to be bestsellers, are not going to get on these bestseller lists. These are why, you know, they talk about bookstores. Like if you see a book on a shelf and it's before the release date, don't buy it, don't buy it. Because it's going to affect first week sales. And that can affect you getting on a bestseller list. Most of us aren't going to be on there. Babe, you know, I just like, most of us are not going to get on a bestseller list. It is not going to happen for most of us. These lists are, there's a very high threshold and most of us are not going to hit that, which is why when people are like, I saw your book earlier, I don't know, should I buy it? I'm like, buy it, please. I still make money off of that. Please buy it. Just buy it. And there's so much pressure put on those first week sales when that is all like the pre-order lead up, really, or someone buying your book in the very first week it comes out. And that is just not how most people are buying books. They want to hear from other people. They want to hear from their friends. They want to get recommendations. They want to feel like, oh, I've heard about this book a few times. Let me go out and get it. Let me do all these things. People that pre-order and go in the first week, like that is a very high buy-in. And that is not going to be the average reader. And so the lifetime of your book, how your book is doing over weeks, over months, over years even, that is so much more important than those first week sales. And it is so much more achievable because you can tell people, hey, just go into the bookstore and buy my book instead of, it's going to come out on this date 3 months from now. Pre-buy it, please. Buy it in advance. That is a hard sell for the average person. And so those first week sales, they don't matter because you will have a lifetime of the book. You will have at least a whole year of that book to see how that works, to see how those sales go. And to be honest, there are lots of times where you can be selling really well and a publisher will still tell you that you did bad. These sorts of things, they're not as cut and dry as it may seem. There may be also times where you can perform at sort of a mid-level and still continue on with a publisher, still continue getting deals. What really matters is that lifetime of the book. Royalties don't matter. Royalties don't matter because a lot of authors in traditional publishing are never earning out of their advance. It is not a thing that happens commonly. And I think what people put a lot of stock in is the idea of earning out. So like, I have accepted a lower advance because I wanted to earn out. So that meaning I accepted an advance that was like of a lower amount so that I could increase my chances of actually meeting that advance and then earning royalties on that book, because when you earn out your advance, that's a big accomplishment. You have done something very significant, and that's great. You've earned it out. You get a sort of like earn out stamp of approval, and it's great and fantastic. And then, you know, you're lauded as like doing really well in publishing because you earn out your books, and that really matters. I have known many an author who has earned out a book and still had their publisher not buy something from them the next time. It is not the golden marker of success that it seems that it may be. And royalties are great. It's amazing to earn royalties. It's also amazing to get guaranteed money up front. And that is something that is really important. And so this is why, you know, you have conversations about sometimes authors are offered advances that are huge, that are enormous advances. And it's like that author could never live up to that expectation. They can never earn that out. And there's discussions about, you know, for their career, they should have done a lower advance. They shouldn't have gone that high so that they had more of a chance of earning that out. Then they wouldn't have been seen as a failure, blah, 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 etc. But at the end of the day, you get a $1 million advance, you don't earn out that ridiculous advance, and your publisher decides that your book is a failure, you still have $1 million. And to me, at the end of the day, that matters a lot more. Sure, it is great to earn out. It's great to earn royalties. It's great to look to your publisher like, look at all of this stuff I'm doing. I'm earning out. But for a lot of people, especially for an author career in which income can be very insecure, you do not know that you are going to sell a book at a high amount down the line. It is just, I feel better to go ahead and take a higher advance that you do not think you can earn out than to take something lower that you're like, yeah, I can earn that out, and then not be sure that that's going to happen, because you can't predict that. And also you're not going to get access to that earn out, those royalties, those things until like down the line. Because you have to spend the time selling those books and earning out, and then you can get the royalties, and you get the royalties sort of twice a year. And sure, advances are broken down into different payments. You are not going to get those payments as frequently, but when you get those payments, it's still a significant chunk of money. And you can still earn out, as I said, and still be offered a lower advance the next time. So yeah, $1 million book deal, you don't earn it out, you're considered a failure. And so next time they say, okay, we'll give you 100,000. Is that a wild drop from $1 million? Absolutely, but it's still 100,000, and you still have the $1 million that you did get. And so to me, at the end of the day, those things are really worth it. And for some people, sometimes having that higher advance puts pressure on authors, and it does stress them out, and it affects mental health. And sometimes that load and bearing that is not worth it for some people in terms of getting maybe a lower advance and feeling more secure, because you know, mental health is important, and it's important especially for a creative field and for writing and for getting work done. And so that all matters, and that all plays into it. But I think if it was me, and certainly my feeling is that I would rather accept a ridiculous advance that I never could earn out, than to be like, yeah, sure, I'll go with a more modest advance, and maybe I can earn out. I think the modest advance, if that's all you're getting and you're not going to get anything else, then like, yeah, great, of course, hype up the fact that at least that means that you can earn out easier, you can get royalties. That is the silver lining of what might be a difficult situation. But I would be hard pressed. I don't think there would be any situation in which I would tell someone, yeah, don't bother with that $1 million deal because you're never going to earn it out, and then how will you get royalties? I think royalties can be fantastic if you have them, but I don't think that royalties matter enough to turn down a higher advance. Let's talk about special editions. Special editions. So it used to be, back in the day, if you got like a book box, if you were in like an owl crate or something like that, that it was like almost like a guaranteed bestseller thing. Like if you got into a book box, wow, that was amazing. You were going to sell so many copies. You were going to become a bestseller. This was going to break out your book. It was going to be amazing because it was so exclusive. It's not like that anymore. There are so many special editions now. There are so many. There are books that are coming out first printing that are special editions that have special edges and sprayed edges and all these sorts of things. These editions have become so much more commonplace. I feel like getting a special edition, while wonderful for you as an author, of course I would never turn down a special edition, it's amazing. I don't think they have the sales impact that they once had. Asterix with the asterisk. And the asterisk to me is something that has a sort of high buy-in. And this means that a sort of special edition where up front they are going to buy a huge amount of copies in order to have this exclusive special edition. And so with these, I'm really talking about bookstores. I'm talking about a Barnes & Noble special edition, an Indigo special edition, a Waterstone special edition. Those sorts of special editions, very different because they are buying a larger amount of stock. They have a huge amount of bookstores that this is going to be sold through. It increases the amount of copies sold exponentially because they are buying enough to stock in their stores and to highlight in their stores and promote in their stores. And because they are big corporations, it has a huge impact. As opposed to a book box, like these sort of independent book boxes are really small businesses. They're small businesses, and they can have huge impact in sales. I think, you think of sort of, there are lots of books that are featured in Illumicrate, for example, that go on to become Sunday Times bestsellers. They become bestsellers in the UK. I believe the US, in their bestseller list, they often exclude book boxes, so it's not the same sort of direct situation, but it kind of generates a lot of hype, and it used to generate enough hype that those books would kind of independently become bestsellers because there was so much hype of them being in different book boxes, those sorts of things. And it's just not really necessarily that case anymore. And so this is like a very asterisk one. But rather to say that being in a book box is not a guarantee of huge book sales, is not a guarantee of like quote unquote success in the way that it used to be, or the way that it used to feel, because certainly I believe that the special edition market is it's very oversaturated at this point. Not necessarily always oversaturated with a lot of BIPOC representation or marginalized representation, but there's a lot of special editions. There's a lot out there, and so I think it doesn't have the impact that it used to have, where if you were kind of a mid-list author and you got in a book box, it would be huge. And the final thing we're going to talk about in things that don't matter: Goodreads. So the things that don't matter on Goodreads, you want to read. And for authors, I understand why authors will be like, I have 10,000 people want to read the book, because it looks flashy. It looks flashy, and I have done it. I have 100% done it. I have done it where I've checked on my Goodreads numbers to make sure that I got to 10,000 ads, and then I've made a post being like, I have 10,000 ads on Goodreads. Something, please go and add it. Please think my book is popular. Please think my book is exciting and people are talking about it and it's buzzy, please. And that is what that is. And I just don't think that matters as much as people think it does. And I think Goodreads ratings, to a certain extent, so this is the asterisk of Goodreads, because just in general, I'm a YouTuber. I'm on YouTube. I also watch a lot of BookTube because I enjoy that and I love reading and I like watching that. And I'm a sort of level author where people that I watch on BookTube almost never talk about my books. So I'm always like very safe to be a consumer of BookTube. And I frequently do hear people mention the rating. They do mention, oh, this book has like a 3 point whatever rating on Goodreads, to the frustration of many authors. Because if you're an author looking at those stats, you know that it is very hard to stay above a 4. It just is. It's very, very hard. And it's not even that the book is bad. It's that you can get a lot of people that rate it 3. And if a lot of people are middle of the road and you don't have a ton of 5 stars, you have a lot of 4 and 3 stars, you are going to end up in the 3s. And there is like, I definitely get this feeling that people are like, oh, it's in the 3s. Like, that's not so great. That's not so great. But it is, I mean, it's hard to be above that. But people still read those books. People I've seen so many times, people be like, oh, this book has like a 3. But I've heard enough people talking about it, I'm still gonna read it. And this is for people that are very online. But the average person is not really checking Goodreads for a score before they buy a book. They go into a bookstore, they saw it on Amazon, they saw someone recommend it, whatever. They might glance at the rating, whatever. But something has brought them to the book. They have found the book to be interesting. They're gonna pick it up. And I feel like there is a very, very high stock put into Goodreads that is not necessary. And I think about this a lot too when I think about these sort of like Goodreads drama sort of things that happen. And I mean, of course it sucks to have people low voting your book on Goodreads. Of course it sucks to have people going and saying things about your book on Goodreads that may not even be factually true. Of course that sucks. It sucks if people, you know, for some sort of not real important, not like a problematic thing, just like something, you know, you talked about a fandom that you didn't, and you said, I don't really care for this, and people got mad at you and they decide to go on Goodreads and low vote you. Or you exist and you are a person of color or a queer person and people are like, I hate that. Let me go on your Goodreads and let me rate you down. That stuff sucks. It sucks. It's not fun. But at the end of the day, those numbers and how those numbers translate to sales is so different. It is not a one-to-one. There are lots of books that people will say, oh, I think this book is like objectively terrible and I'm rating it low on Goodreads and I think it's a bad book. And those books are selling very well. And there are cases in which people are like, oh, I don't like this book. I don't think this book is very good. It's got a 3 point whatever. And that book will be a critically acclaimed book. It will be a book winning a bunch of awards. It will be a book doing very well in terms of accolades. And that author will do well in that way. And so I say this really because this is why authors tell you, and one of the many reasons why authors tell you not to be on Goodreads and not to look at your Goodreads and don't get it, because people get obsessed with it. People get so like consumed with the Goodreads and everything that is on Goodreads. And you see when you hear things about people going on and like starting these campaigns to like go around and low vote Goodreads and do all these lists and do all this manipulation to produce a result from Goodreads. And it's just, it's not really worth it. And of course there are some things from Goodreads that can be great, like, you know, being in those Goodreads Choice Awards. That's exciting. That's wonderful. That's promotion. But I can tell you, as someone who has been in those Goodreads Choice Awards, it does not have the effect on sales that you might think. And I think that is because Goodreads, those choice awards, people are often looking and they want to see that they recognize books. And I think it is meant to be a tool for people to sometimes discover books that they maybe haven't heard of. And this is just kind of my observation from watching, from seeing things, and from being an author who had a book nominated in the Goodreads Choice Awards. Like, that was really exciting. And I remember I thought something really big was gonna come out of that, because I was like, oh, this is amazing. Like, so then like a bunch of people are gonna like read my books because they'll see it on the choice awards and they'll be like, wow, I've never heard of this book, but it's in these big awards, so I should check out this book. Not necessarily what happened at all. Not necessarily what happened at all, because people look and they're like, oh, these are the books that I know. It is, I mean, it's a voting thing, and so a voting thing is always going to be like, people will pick what they know and what they recognize, and so that sort of creates a certain focus where people see what they know and what they recognize. And of course, is it a touch point? Absolutely. It is everything that you interact with as an author. Everything that promotes your book is a touch point. That could have been the thing that someone saw and they were already thinking about the book and they were like, you know what? That's the thing that's going to make me pick up this book. This is like the touch point of like 5. This is the 5th touch point where I'm like, okay, you know what? This has like changed my mind for a book. Absolutely. But again, this is like the things that are not as big of a deal as it seems like they might be. Of course, if you have ridiculous Goodreads numbers, of course, but if you had ridiculous Goodreads numbers, you probably also have ridiculous publisher buy-in, publisher promotion. You probably have a lot of ridiculous things that are already going on that have brought it to that point. But if you are a, you know, regular author and you're on Goodreads and you're like, oh, my rating is low, or oh, not that many people are adding my book, or oh, I'm getting bad reviews, doesn't matter as much as you think it matters. It really doesn't. First thing I would say matters a lot is your contract, your publishing contract, because these are things that you can hold the publisher accountable for because they are in that contract. And so things like, for example, how long your publisher has to read your option material and make a decision about it. I have seen a lot of authors where in their contract, it doesn't really specify a date or time. And so they can end up in situations in which they have sent their option material to their publisher, so sent like a proposal or the next book to them, and the publisher can sit on it for months. For months they can sit on it making a decision. And in that time, that author cannot take that book out to different publishers, different editors. They are stuck in this limbo of waiting for their publisher to tell them whether or not they want it, because the option means the publisher has the right for first refusal. So you have to show it to them first. And whereas opposed to if you have language in your contract that says you have, for example, they have to get back to you in 30 days. Then they have to get back to you in 30 days. And so you are not put in that limbo. Of course, are there always exceptions? Your publisher might be like, hey, we love you so much. Please, please, please give us 2 extra weeks on this. We would love that. And probably you are going to say, okay, yeah, that's fine. You can have 2 extra weeks. Let's do it. Is it outside of what the contract says? Absolutely. But you are operating in sort of a good faith situation. But this does not necessarily go the same way from publisher to author. So if you have no language in your contract for that, that can happen. You can be in that limbo for months. And these are why things like the contract matter. This is why it matters to have a really good literary agent who can help you with all of that negotiating. And so there are also different things in contract. There are also predatory contracts. There are contracts in which people put in things that are predatory to authors. I've heard of people having contracts in which they were given social media obligations. There might be in contracts, for example, maybe your publisher wants to put in something about AI and say, hey, we can use your book to train AI, and that's in your contract. These are things that I haven't heard of anyone doing that. I don't know if anyone has that, just to say. But like, these are why the contract is important, because the contract is the legal document that is going to decide on kind of the hard and fast of how you and your publisher are going to operate. Also, the sort of regions that your book can be sold in. What sort of rights do they have to the book? Do they have the right to sell sort of merchandise, for example? These are rights that you do want to hold to yourself. Same as things like films rights. You don't want to, in your contract, give them the film rights because you want to keep those for yourself, so that you can continue to get cuts and things like that from those sorts of things. So the contract, definitely important and definitely does matter. Your literary agent. So in traditional publishing, the literary agent that you are working with, if you are working with a literary agent, because not everyone in traditional most people, but not everyone is actually working with a literary agent. But your agent matters so much. Your agent, a bad agent, can burn projects for you. They do a bad submission to editors, to publishers. They can burn that bridge for you. They can make things very difficult. You hear so many horror stories of people with bad agents that just have terrible experiences. Their self-esteem is crushed. They are being lied to. They are being pulled along. All these different things that can really affect them as a writer. And having a good agent, having an actual good advocate, can make a world of difference. This is how you can get better negotiations. They are selling your projects. They can be more successful with the sale of your project. They can help you on an ongoing basis. If you have an editorial agent, they are helping you with your manuscripts and putting your manuscripts together. Having a good agent is so important. Because when you have a bad agent, they can really they can very much tank your career. You could be having good books that go nowhere because the agent is mismanaging them. And so this is why it's so important to have a good agent. This is why people also say that it's better to have no agent than a bad agent. And I know that sucks to hear when you don't have an agent, because it's like, to me, like when I didn't have an agent and I heard that, I was so just F you, okay, why would you say that to me? But it matters. And it really does. And I can say, like, a personal experience, like in the past, when I first was querying with Blood Like Magic, which became my debut novel, I did get an offer, and I didn't feel good about it. And so I ended up turning that down. And I continued querying. And so I had a chance to get an agent, which I turned down because it didn't seem like it was going to work out for me. I didn't feel good about it. Which is not to say that person is a bad agent or anything like that. It's just, it wasn't the right fit for me. And so I went back into the query trenches, and then I found my agent, who I'm with, Christy Hunter, who I've been with my entire career and hope to be with continuing forward, because she's great. And that matters. Like, that's really important. And so absolutely, having a good agent. And on that same end, having a good editor. And so this is the editor is a tiny bit of an asterisk, I will say. If your editor leaves, you are not necessarily choosing the next editor who you work with. And that is the difference to me between that relationship and the agent relationship. If your agent leaves, you have control in terms of you are going to choose the next agent that you are working with, in that you are going to decide who to query or decide who to work with, that sort of thing. But on the editor side, you are already on contract for that book. So that contract must be fulfilled, or you are going to end up in a situation where you may have to give money back. And so they're going to pick the next editor, and that's who you're going to work with. And so that's the sort of asterisk of like it mattering, in that sometimes it has to kind of not matter because you might get shifted around. But having a good editor is really important. And it's not just important for the content of the book and for like having a good edit on a book. Of course, that's important, and that matters because having that good editor can help you create that good book and put that out into the world. But for me, the higher importance of the editor is that that person is your advocate at the publisher. So your editor is the person that is going to push for you. So if they think, you know what, we don't think this book cover is good enough, they're the person that has to push back against the publishing team to make that happen. If you are dissatisfied with something in your publishing journey, of course your agent can handle that on your behalf, but at the end of the day, the editor is going to be the person that is going to be going to the wider team and saying, so and so is dissatisfied with X, and what can we do and how can we shift? Your editor is the one hyping you up. The editor is the one that is, for example, with acquisitions, that sort of thing, of your next project, they are the one hyping you up. They're the one that is pitching your book to the rest of the publisher. They are the one that is really going to be that driving force for making sure that your publisher cares about your book. And that matters a lot, because if your editor is apathetic, that makes it really difficult for you to get publisher support, and publisher support is what helps sell your book. And I would hope that your editor is not apathetic, because usually they're the acquiring editor, they're the person that fought to buy your book in the first place, so hopefully they care a lot about it. But sometimes in those situations in which your editor might leave and you get a new editor that didn't acquire your book, maybe they are not as passionate about your book, that can make things really difficult for you. And so I will say that in fact does matter. Your book cover matters. It matters. And this is why I think a popular piece of advice that I've heard as an author in traditional publishing was that if you are going to fight for anything, fight for your cover. If you do not like your cover, if you do not think it looks good, if other people, if readers do not like your cover, that is the thing to fight for. That is the thing to be a little bit of a diva about. That is the thing to really push to make sure it is good, because covers do sell books. Covers matter, and they are a huge piece of marketing, especially for, if your book is just kind of out in the bookstore and it's out and about, that also really matters. Like, someone seeing your book and being like, oh, I'm gonna pick that up, look at that cover's beautiful, or I don't know, this book sounds interesting but that cover is bad, I don't really want to pick up that book. It matters. People judge books by their covers. It is important, and these things are especially important in marketing and catching people's eye. You are going to post about this book and show this cover constantly. You're going to do it over and over and over and over again. It is your main piece of marketing for your book. When people are promoting your book and they are showing your book around, they are going to show your cover. It is huge. It is very important, and it matters. And I know that sucks, because I know there will be some people that are like, my cover is bad and I hate it, and it sucks that it matters. And it really does, because it's just, it makes a difference. And it does in fact suck when your book cover is not cute and you don't like it, especially because you have to keep holding it up. You have to go to all these events and all of these things, and every time you promote it, you gotta hold up the cover and smile and grin and act like you love that cover that you absolutely hate and think is so ugly. But it does matter. And last thing I'm gonna say matters is book festivals. And why is this different from when I was talking about tours and launch events? So to me, a book festival is different because it is not focused on you. It is not focused on one author. And that is the big difference to me from something like an event. It is also not necessarily a compacted time. So it's not like, come to this thing on this specific day for 1 hour. Often book festivals are multiple days. There are multiple days, they have a larger time bracket, and that to me is the different thing. They also have a much larger amount of authors. And so this is like when I was talking about how I think like tours are really good when you have multiple authors. It is basically what I am applying to the book festival, in that the book festival is large enough that you have a lot of different authors, and so you have a lot of people coming, you have a lot of different readers coming, and that expands the audience significantly. And again, not all book festivals are structured this way, but often, at least from my experience, they will have a sort of showroom floor, which will have, different vendors, including publishers, who will be promoting and showing off the books. Then on top of that, they will have panels. So they'll have speaking engagements, which you as an author can speak and chat and show off your books. And they may have some other little fun events in between there to promote a lot of different books. And so to me, that exposure is doing what that sort of event is doing, but on a larger scale. And a big bonus of these sorts of events to me is the networking opportunity. You have an opportunity to go and meet with other authors. And I know networking is kind of an icky word, but I mean, to me, it means you have a chance to go and hang out with a bunch of different authors, to meet different authors and to form those sort of in-person connections, which are things that can be great in terms of you go to a festival, you go to dinner with a bunch of authors, you hang out, and you spend time together, and you're oh, that was you talk about your different projects, and oh, we have kind of similar books, we should do an event together, we should do something in the future. And it creates a bit of a more solid connection and relationship to continue on with that author, to do different things. It's also a great opportunity to interact in whisper networks, so to sometimes learn things about publishing, about editors or agents or industry things, to learn insider information that you might not necessarily learn online or even in a DM space, because those create receipts. And sometimes information is sensitive enough that people don't want any sort of receipt to be created. And so when you are there in that in-person setting, that is when things can be talked about a little bit more openly. It's also great for you when you are a debut author or a new author to something, to get a little bit of a litmus test, to ask people about certain things, to say, oh, what's your kind of experience with this publisher, with this thing, that sort of thing, and to get that in a little bit more of a group setting. And I think that's something that people aren't necessarily thinking about when they think about, trad pub advantages and going to a book festival. But to me, that's really huge. That's really big. It also gives you a direct line to a lot of different booksellers. And sometimes, because the book festivals are specialized, they may be a librarian conference or a bookseller conference, those sorts of things. It gives you as an author an opportunity to interact with and make connections with the people that are selling your books in bookstores, the people that are putting your books in libraries, and to make a little bit more of an impression. Because this is the thing, when your publisher is promoting your book to those people, you have a salesperson, or you have a library representative, what have you, and they have a huge list of authors. They have a huge list of authors that they have to talk about, a huge list of books that they have to talk about, and they cannot talk about everyone equally. And of course, if you're a lead title, they're going to talk about you more, and that's fantastic, but a lot of people won't be. And because of the scale and the size of festivals, there is an opportunity for more mid-list authors to be invited, and it's a great opportunity for you as a more mid-list author, as not a huge big name, to have an impact and to have visibility that you might not necessarily have gotten from that representative because of the amount of people on their roster, essentially. It's a time where you can make a little bit more of an impression, and I do think that matters. You can make connections. You can talk to people. I've had situations where I've talked to booksellers or places like that where I've been maybe we should do an event together in the future, and I have a name now. I have someone that I can say, oh, I met so and so at this place, this person, this place. And I don't think these things are things that must happen. Obviously they're not things that must happen. A lot of people don't get invited to certain book festivals, those sorts of things, those sorts of larger book events. There have been many times where I've not been invited to things. There have been times when I have been invited to things. And so I don't want it to come across as like this make or break if you can't get into something like that. But a lot of places will have more local events. And I do think those sorts of things are worth trying out at least once to see if you can experience it. Again, this might not always be feasible for people. I know sometimes people may have certain disabilities or might have certain barriers that make it impossible to go to those sorts of things, in which case you can try and participate in things that might be online, that sort of thing. I just do find it is a good opportunity to interact with the community to a larger scale as opposed to a one-on-one thing. And that is it for this video about things in trad pub that don't matter and little brackets and do matter, because I talked about both of those. I would love to have a dialogue with you in the comments. Were there things I said that you agreed or disagreed with, which you are allowed to because this is an opinion and not objective fact. So feel free to put that in the comments. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed already, please subscribe. And thank you so much for watching. Bye!